be named Citizen of the Month, what happened was I went to visit a certain property where this certain lady was being bit by fleas apparently, and she didn't have any pets. She doesn't have any people in that have pets, so it was a bit curious why she was getting bit. So further investigation, next door's had some insects and some flies on the window. So I asked the lady who I went to see if she visited next door, does she have any pets? She says, yes, she has pets, but she doesn't go into her property and they don't really speak that much. So I was like, okay, so they went outside to look at her flat. I could see her windows were covered in, the curtains were closed, there was insects on the window, there was some flies. So I went back up into the flats, lifted the letterbox, and there was an awful smell, so I knocked the door. There was no answer, the dogs didn't bark. So it obviously raised an awareness for me, so then I immediately phoned Carrie Fisher, the housing officer, just to let her know there's something seriously wrong here, and she needs to make the appropriate phone calls, in which she did. And a few days later I found out that the paramedic says if she was left for another week, she wouldn't be here with us now. So I'm so glad that I did that for her.
I was named the Citizen of the Month because of sourcing PPE during the pandemic, which was challenging, and negotiating better prices and providing cost information that was useful for senior managers in their decision making. To be honest, during the pandemic, it was not an easy task to source PPE, but I realized with a great network of professional procurement professionals on the background and having a good understanding of the supply market, I thought I could use this opportunity to contribute towards the corporate objectives of the organization.
There was an old lady who was, she's one of my tenants. She's about 92, I think now. She's profoundly deaf. And she rang me one night in a terrible state because she'd received a bank statement and the balance on the statement was zero. So she was in a terrible state, thinking that somebody had taken all her money. So obviously my immediate thoughts were perhaps there was financial abuse involved. I did a home visit and went through all her bank statements and reassured her that she was worried that her money had all been taken out of a bank, and I was able to reassure her.
I got a call off Leslie, the manager at St John Campbell Court. One of the elderly tenants got out of hospital. They had leukemia or something like that and he needed some supplies, so stopped what I was doing because I was waiting anyway for something to dry, so I just zipped round the shop for them and got him some supplies and made him a brew and checked he was alright. That was it really. It's not that I wanted the voucher or anything like that, because I'm just going to give it to charity anyway. It's just something good to be recognised again within the company.
I was working with a tenant that had developed cataracts in both of his eyes very quickly. So while I was doing this, he had no way of communicating with his doctors, he didn't have a phone, and he was able to read his letters. So I sort of worked with the doctors to arrange appointments and then escorted him to the appointments, walking him to the doctor's office and back. Also then arranging his hospital appointments. And eventually getting into the point where he had operations to remove the cataracts on both of his eyes and regain his eyesight.
We arrived on our first job. I noticed out the corner of my eye there was an old lady that was in some difficulty. She'd fallen over on a grass bank. I went to assist her. We took her off the grass. She was covered in mud. She'd only got a nightie under her coat, and at that time I noticed that she'd got a significant amount of money in her pocket, so I sort of pushed that back in her pocket for her. And then we took her over to the van, and my first instinct was to keep her warm. I thought that she was probably in some shock. She was shaking, and we put the heater on the van and just kept her as warm as we possibly could. I did attempt to question her in terms of what happened, where she was from, did she live locally. She didn't even know her name, to be quite honest with you, so it was at that time that I was alerted to the fact that there was probably something wrong, and then decided to call 999 to get some assistance from the ambulance service.
I work for the Money Advice team, and I received a referral from our income team who had concerns regarding a customer who's 80, whose rent account had gone from being in credit to being £3,500 in debt. When I visited, the customer's son was present, and it evolved that the son had a gambling habit and was controlling his dad's finances. So further investigation, I opened up a safeguarding case for financial abuse. The son was arrested, the customer was taken into care, he suffers with dementia. I was able to get discretionary housing payment to clear his rent arrears and sort his finances out, get his benefits put back into payment. And when he returned home, there is now a support network.
We became aware that citizen property had been essentially taken over by perpetrators who targeted one of our vulnerable customers to use the property for purpose of drug dealing, drug use and criminal activity, which left our customer extremely unwell due to physical abuse, financial abuse and emotional abuse. When we became aware of this, we worked with colleagues within Citizen and external partners, police, mental health service, to ensure that we safeguarded this vulnerable customer.
To be named Citizen of the Month, I took a food parcel from my home to a tenant, basically because he had contacted late at night and said that he'd fallen over because he hadn't taken his medication, had no money and no food at home. So we arranged a food bank voucher for the next day, but because I didn't want him to wait until the next day, I put together a little parcel and took it round that night so that he was able to take his medication and so that we could check that he didn't need medical attention.
A member of my team, Denise, who had been engaging with a person who had had a relationship breakdown. The gentleman was suffering with medical issues, which meant that he was unable to leave the property, and Denise was concerned for his health further because he'd not eaten in a couple of days. Denise herself was unable to collect the food bank parcel due to lockdown measures, so I volunteered to come from outside of Coventry to pick up the food bank package, which I did, and then dropped to his door. I then took a call a few days later again from Denise in a similar circumstance with a gentleman that needed medication, who again was unable to collect it directly from the pharmacy, this pharmacy being on the other side of the city, which wasn't his usual pharmacy. So again, I liaised with Denise and the pharmacy to go and pick up his medication, travelled from where I live to collect it and drop it to his door.
I carried out quite a difficult sign-up for Frank Walsh House, got a referral through from Coventry City Council explaining that a family had been in a house fire the previous night and we needed accommodating. The mum explained about the fire and telling me how they'd lost literally everything. The fire started in the kids' bedroom, so they instantly panicked, as I'm sure anybody would, you know, just got to a place of safety, but then watched all their belongings, Christmas presents and stuff just go up in flames. Later on that night I couldn't stop thinking about it, so when I was home I was talking to my partner and telling her, you know, what had happened and stuff, so we decided that we'd have a little rummage around my stepdaughter's bedroom and see if there was anything there we could find just to try and help the family. And yeah, we managed to come across 2 sacks of toys in the doll's house, and one thing that stood out for me was the little boy. I know that he lost his Woody and Buzz, and his mum was telling me how much that meant to him, so I went and replaced them for him as well. And the next day when I went into work, yeah, I called the mum down to the office and presented her with what we dug out.
To be named Citizen of the Month, I'd worked as a mental health first aider within the organisation, and I'd had lots of challenging conversations with people that were struggling, and one specific one around Christmas time where someone was at crisis point and they'd approached for some support and had that conversation with that person. So it was all about that role as a mental health first aider.
To be named Citizen of the Month, I actually attended an out-of-hours emergency on a Christmas day. It was to a female tenant who was having a leak from a tenant upstairs. There was all elderly, but there was no means of getting contact to the elderly person upstairs. So we had to contact the manager, Andy Pallet, on Christmas Day as well, you know, and he went out his way to actually get hold of the carer. We went through the appropriate steps, and we was able to go in there, isolate the problem, and ensure that the tenant actually got the correct services and care that he was, you know, he was due to get, he was meant to get.